Good morning, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the International Conference with the theme Buddhist Values and Economics, Investing in a Sustainable Future, jointly organized by the European Spirituality in Economics and Society, in short the SPES, Institute, and the Center of Buddhist Studies of the University of Hong Kong. We are very happy to see you all on this second day of the conference. And once again, we would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the GS Charity Foundation, the sole sponsor of the conference this time, for its very generous support to us and the many supporting organizations which make this event possible. So without further ado, we are going to begin our conference today by inviting Dr. G.A. Somaratna, Assistant Professor of the Hong Kong U Center of Buddhist Studies, to introduce and welcome our first keynote speaker today, Professor Clair Brown. Dr. Somaratna, please.
Good morning, everyone. So it is with great pleasure I come in front of you to introduce this morning's keynote speaker. You already know she is an eminent scholar in the field of Buddhist economics because our presenters yesterday referred to her name and also works several times. She is currently serving as Professor of Economics at the University of California, Berkeley, UCB. And in addition, she serves as Director of the Center for Works, Technology, and Society at UCB. She was formerly Director of the Institute of Industrial Relations at the same university. Her contribution to the field of labor economics was recognized by Labor and Employment Association with the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award in 2010. She has published widely in economics, Buddhist economics, and related subject areas. Among these, I will mention one important work titled Buddhist Economics, an Enlightened Approach to the Dismal Economics, published by Bloomsbury Press in 2017. In this work, she introduces human nature as kind and altruistic, and that people not only interdependent with each other, but also with nature. This work has been commented by the 2001 Nobel laureate, George Akerlof, in the following words. I quote, a long time ago, Adam Smith demonstrated that economy would work pretty well if everyone was selfish. But Clair Brown has done considerably better. Her perceptive book has important messages to everyone. So please give a warm welcome with a big applause to Professor Clair Brown to today's Economics Forum to deliver the keynote speech. She will speak on Buddhist economics, industrial and government actions to create an equitable, sustainable future. So, Professor Clair Brown.
Thank you, that was very kind. Welcome. Thank you for coming on a Sunday morning when it's beautiful outside, this glorious day when probably your alternative was taking a beautiful stroll up to the peak. So thank you. I really appreciate your being here, and I hope we make it worth your time. And thank you for your kind introduction. May I live up to it. So I would like us to start off, though, on this day of caring for each other and the earth, the theme of our conference, with just a moment of silence. And so let's just have a moment of contemplation. And so may we all open our hearts and our minds for the rest of the day as we explore Buddhism and economics. Now, let me warn you, I'm an economist. I'm not a Buddhist scholar. I practice Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, but it's had a huge impact upon my life and my way of thinking about economics. And so I want to share that with you. Oh, finally, it works. So we have two critical problems. We have inequality and we have climate change. For the first part of my career, I worked on inequality. I worked with my colleagues at Berkeley, at MIT, and as we worked on inequality, it got worse and worse. The globe just put up with inequality. Is there feedback on the? We need to have a technical solution going on. Thank you. So in some ways, I felt like a failure. We did fail. As economists, we failed. The politicians just had their stay, and they thought inequality is fine. There's no problem with inequality. I'll just hold the mic. Hey, I can do that. But then about 3 decades ago, is this okay? How about if I put it way over here? How's that? Is that okay? We'll just try this. Okay. I won't look at it. I have to look at you this way. So I don't know if you realize this, but in the last 3 decades, 1/2 of the carbon emissions in the atmosphere are from the last 3 decades. So all of us jointly together have been responsible for 1/2 of the carbon emissions in the last 30 years. That's enormous. So we used fossil fuel, which was a cheap way to develop our economies for a very high standard of living, but we were going to be passing along a planet that wasn't going to be inhabitable by humans and many, many species. Now, as Buddhists, that means we're doing a lot of harm. So we're really needing to deal with this. So I started working on climate change, and I went to my colleagues and I said, hey, we can't fail this time. We've got to find a way to have economics be in the discussion with the climate scientists, because we can't let big business rule the world again, which is what had happened with inequality. So now I'm much more determined. Whoops. And I'm going to learn how to use all this equipment, I promise. So let me first of all explain to you my version of Buddhist economics, which will, I think, make a lot of sense to you, because I'm going to tell you the 3 main assumptions, which you'll say, oh, well, everybody knows that. The 3 main assumptions are interdependence of people with each other and with the planet. So there's Indra's net to remind me. The second is impermanence. Everything changes, and we know that too. So we all know not to ever latch on or care about anything in terms of strong attachment, because, hey, it's going to change. And we're seeing the world now changing very rapidly. And then the third, which is really important to us as Buddhists, is compassion. We want to care for each other and reduce suffering around the world. Now, fortunately for me as an economist, scientists have really come in and shown that all these assumptions, these basic assumptions, actually have validity with scientific research. And we'll come back to that too. But let me first of all quote Barry Commoner, he's a founder of modern ecology. And what's really interesting is ecology is a very new science, but it's telling us about interdependence, which Buddha taught us a very, very long time ago. So let me quote Commoner. Everything is connected to everything else. There is one ecosphere for all living organisms, and what affects one affects all. Sound pretty common, doesn't it? Oh, but I'm so bad at holding that. Is it okay to just do this?
Okay.
Well, because I have to hold my hand out too. I need a few more. I need more arms. Now, let me just really, really quickly take you over free market economics, which, trust me, as an economics professor, I have even taught many, many times in Econ 1. It's a model that I don't know any economist who believes in this model. The politicians might, but economists, most of us, with a few exceptions, know this model is just a silly way of really quickly presenting economics quickly to undergraduates, even if it is misleading. So the free market economy is based upon 3 beliefs or assumptions, worldviews. One is more is better. You can never have enough. Ever, ever, ever can you have enough. One more dollar, even if you're Bill Gates, even if you're Zuckerberg, one more dollar makes you better off and more satisfied. The other is people are selfish and rational. We take care of ourselves, we look out for ourselves, and we're doing this in a very rational, mechanistic way. And the third is we all want to maximize income, both as people and as a country. Now, this is really important, and this is where I see people in daily life making a big mistake when we talk about economic systems. Markets are always structured. All markets are structured. There's no such thing as a free market, and that's what all the economists will tell you. Hey, you can't have a market that's not structured. We have to protect private property. We have to have rules of entry and exit. Even the so-called competitive free market has a lot of rules that protects the owners of capital. Now, the question then is who's going to structure the markets? So if you're into so-called free markets, you want big business to structure the markets for big profits. But if you care about the well-being of all people on the planet, you want governments to structure markets for the common good. And so a lot of my talk is going to be about policies for structuring markets and creating an economy that's for the well-being of all people and the earth. So you ask, what's a government structure? And there's a handout that I'll show you all these different ways that government structures markets. But the way to think about it is governments have taxation programs, they have subsidies, they have rules, they have regulations of the labor market. They structure it through all kinds of rules, incentives, and also social programs. The delivery of healthcare and education is structuring those markets. So all markets are structured, and it's really important for you to remember that. And so when people talk about, we want a market economy, you say, of course we want a market economy. Who's going to structure it? Because we care about structuring the economy to meet social goals and outcomes. I'll get the hang of it. So being an economist, I want to just go through 4 observations with some data that to me sets up the argument for why a Buddhist economy would work to improve people's well-being and health, as well as sustainability in the planet. So I'm going to go through these 4. Number 1, inequality and CO2 go together. So our 2 biggest crises are intertwined. When people have more money, their carbon footprint skyrockets. They own luxury ships, they fly around in private planes, they have lots of houses, they have enormous carbon footprints. Also, rich countries have much higher carbon footprints than poorer countries. Now, 2 Nobel laureates have taught us how countries choose their level of inequality, and the climate scientists have taught us that countries choose their carbon footprint. So countries and how they structure their markets and their social programs are telling us what's the level of inequality, what's the level of CO2 emissions. Now that's going to be really important if we want to create a Buddhist economy, because we have to say, oh, what policies are going to structure markets and structure social programs in a way that gives us the outcomes we want. So here's this great chart, and I hope you can see it. My PowerPoint's online, and this is from an Oxfam report. This is a fantastic report. I don't know if you can see it, but this just shows you at the top, I show you carbon footprint by the top 10%, and those are the green lines. And then the next line down is average. But basically what this shows is rich people in every country have huge carbon footprints compared to the average person. And that the United States is a real outlier. Our carbon footprint compared to any other advanced country is really high. The top 10% in the US emit 50 tons of carbon per year. The average person in the US, though, is not very good. It's over 16 tons. So we're going to come back, but if you move down the line, you quickly see, you know what? The developing countries like India and Indonesia at the bottom, they need a chance to actually develop and have a little bit bigger carbon footprint. So we have to think about it globally and not just selfishly for our own countries. So now I want you to see, I'm hoping that you'll be convinced by a little bit of data I gathered. Do you have a handout? Does everybody have a handout? And I hope you can share if there are. Anybody need a handout? Oh, I'm not sure. Okay, so I just threw together some countries. I actually, to be honest, I really tried to find where everybody was from and to put that country down, plus some other countries that are pretty important by size of economy or population. So what I put in the first column was GDP per capita, and then I put the UN Human Development Index, and then I put the CO2 per person for 1960 and 2014, so you can see how each country is doing better on their carbon emissions. And then I gave an inequality measure in the last column. So if you look at these, you can see these results, that CO2 and carbon emissions are not directly related in these rich countries. You can see the CO2 going up and the carbon emissions actually going up and down. So that's what the Nobel laureate Joe Stiglitz meant when he said countries are choosing their level of inequality and CO2 emissions. Because in the last column you can see too, as GDP or income per capita goes up, the inequality measure also goes up and down. So GDP is not picking people's carbon footprint or their inequality. So that's the reason I made it a handout, so you can look at it and think about it, and then you can always ask me questions at another time. So then, the other thing I want to let you know pretty quickly is how inequality reduces well-being. Now, it does it in two ways. The first way, economists call the relative income, where you have a budget, you have a lifestyle, you have a level of consumption, but you compare how well off you are to the people above you. And that's called invidious comparisons, Veblen, that's his phrase. Or keeping up with the Joneses was another phrase of Veblen's, which I love. So the problem with that is income grows and it's all grabbed by the rich, which is what's been happening in the countries over time. The rich, economic growth has gone disproportionately to the rich. 80 to 90% of it in the US of economic growth has gone to the top 5%. So the rich are grabbing the income growth, but what happens is that everybody else is feeling worse off. Even though they may have the exact same budget and consumption level, their comparisons to other people at the top make them feel less worse off. So that, so inequality makes people feel worse off. But even more importantly, this is actually really important to me as a Buddhist economist, is that health and social programs are worse in more unequal countries. So two terrific public health people in the UK taught us that they created a well-being index, and you can see it over here. The well-being index covers a whole lot of what we think creates well-being for the person, of life expectancy, literacy, mortality, homicides, teen births, obesity, mental illness. So they put this into one index, a well-being index, and then they said, well, what's causing this? So first they said, well, obviously it's GDP per capita. And they plotted that, and bam, it was a scatter diagram. There was no relationship at all. So they looked around for some other possibilities, and what they found was the well-being index is directly linear with inequality across countries. And this is basically the G20, or the larger, wealthier economies. Now, it's a little hard to see, by well-being, actually low. The low on the index is really good and high is really bad. But you can see all these things you put in the index, they're actually negatives, make people worse off. But look at the top. The USA is a real outlier. We have the highest inequality and the worst well-being index. At the bottom is Japan. So at the bottom you see Japan, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Netherlands. They are doing much, much better with Their people are better off with less inequality. And at the top, after the US, so you fall down to Portugal, UK, New Zealand, Australia. So this index is online, and actually they keep it up to date, so you can even get data and play around with it if you want to explore it yourself, or not. So basically then, given these observations, we know we can make society and people better off by transferring income from the rich who are spending it on luxury goods, on status goods, on showing how important they are, to people in need. It will increase societal well-being and make the society better off by income tax transfers. So it's a good argument for why we need a progressive tax system for the society. That is not the free market approach, by the way. That's the Buddhist economics approach. Okay, then the other issue, now you all may not, you may think this is the silliest thing in the world. It actually is sort of silly unless you're an economist. Economists sit around and they fight over, are people altruistic or are we selfish? And they do all these tests, and are people interdependent or are they just individualistic? It really matters which kind of model you use, though, because the free market model says they're selfish and individualistic, and the Buddhist economics says they got to have some altruism and a feeling of interdependence. So the issue got resolved not by economists, but by psychologists and neuroscientists to our rescue that they confirm. People both have altruistic as well as self-regarding instincts. They do both. Well, that's not too big a surprise, except to economists. Economists hate that answer if they want to use the free market. So that people have some unconditional caring about others with no ulterior motive, as well as taking care of themselves. Sounds pretty healthy to me, and also makes a lot of common sense. So that was the third observation. The fourth is helping people and the environment makes you happy. So economists fight and fight and fight about what makes you happy. Is it lots of consumption, more and more consumption, chasing after goods, or what is it? And of course, Aristotle had taught us with eudaimoc happiness, it comes from helping others, good relationships, contributing to the community, living a worthy life. Hedonic happiness is free market happiness, where you have instant pleasure. You avoid pain just by buying and buying and buying stuff. But it doesn't last very long, this happiness. You revert back to your old happiness level. So then you have to keep going out and grasping for more and more. Now in Buddhism, we know happiness comes from within and not from consumption. And furthermore, in Buddhism, grasping makes us suffer. So you can see now we're in two different models. One, grasping makes you happy, and two, grasping makes you suffer. So just remember that the neuroscientists don't listen to the economists. The psychologists and neuroscientists have shown us that helping others and caring for our planet makes us happy and satisfied and living a worthy life. Okay, so I hope you accept these arguments that in fact a Buddhist economy can create a healthier, happier world than a free market economy. So you want to ask very specifically, how do we do this? Now we're going to get to policies and implications for how we live. One is, as you already know, everybody in this room cares for other people and cares for the planet. We know that we want to live mindfully with love, compassion, and wisdom, and we find ways to do this that fits our lifestyle and sort of who we are. But that's not enough. What I'm trying to tell you today, and probably most of you already know, that's not enough, because we are harming others by using fossil fuels and eating anything from industrial agriculture. So our diets, our use of energy, almost our use of water, almost everything we're doing is perhaps harming the planet and harming other people. So we have to ask, oh, what do I do? Well, I personally, but I urge everyone to take action. We have to work together and take action to change the way that not only we are living, but to change the way governments are operating. And that's where a policy index comes into play. So we want to consume less. People say live simply, live frugally, say it however you want. I say live with nature, buy only what you need, but also live more naturally. Don't rely upon the thermostat all the time. Have your indoor temperature and your outdoor temperature. Wear more clothes, wear fewer clothes. Eat carefully, never waste food. There's so many ways that you can live with nature in a way that really reduces your carbon footprint and your harm to others. So let me just very quickly tell you, if the UN benchmark is that by 2050, we need to have only 2.1 tons of CO2 per person. That's not very much CO2. And right now, remember in the US, it's 16.4. But we're way ahead of the UK, I mean the EU. The EU is only 6.7. So once again, the carbon footprint of Europe is much lower than the United States for similar GDPs. It's like, there's just no comparison. So we know that we can do a lot better, but the UN IPCC says we better do it quickly. We only have 11 years to dramatically bring down our carbon footprint, so we better get started. And you can go back to this chart and once again just look and see, 2.1, where is that on this chart? Well, you know what? The only countries that are below that are countries that need to have more development and need to improve their standard of living. And the rest of us need to bring our carbon footprint way down with clean electricity, then electrifying everything. And actually, all these things are in my book. If you ever have a chance to read it, I hope you will, because it was a work of love. So we want to work together to create change, and this is engage Buddhism. So let me just give you a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that I think is really important. To me, has been our spiritual leader in caring for the planet. And he says, our collective compassion, mindfulness, and concentration nourishes us, but it also can help to reestablish the Earth's equilibrium and restore balance. Together we can bring about real transformation for ourselves and for the world. So you can see, together we heal ourselves as we heal the world. So, okay, I've gone around and given a lot of talks on Buddhist economics. And I got to tell you, people always say, this is just pie in the sky. What are you talking about? What countries do this? I said, that's a really good question. So it's not in my book, but I put together a research team at UC Berkeley to say, what are the policies that would create a Buddhist economy? We already know them, and what countries are doing them. And so we worked on this, and now I'm big on handouts. It's the economist in me, so thank you for your patience. But on the second page of your handout are the categories for, we call it a Sustainable Shared Prosperity Policy Index. So these are the indicators in the three categories. One, sustainability, which is caring for the earth and depleting resources or caring for resources. And so you can see it's like ecosystem policies, waste management, which is really important for overconsumption or wasteful consumption, energy generation, land and soil transport. And then it's like, how do you structure markets? And so two of the ways that are really important for structuring markets that affect our lives are employment and taxation. And then you say, what are the government programs that are provided for the people and their well-being? And so we list them: education, healthcare, the infrastructure, the governance, the rights and equal treatment, so we bring in human rights, and the international role. It's not just enough for what you do for your own people, but what are you doing globally with foreign aid, or even worse, foreign aid's good, but weapons sales, of course, is negative. But in this index, we make everything positive to be good. We normalize it. We pull it together. We do a lot of sensitivity analysis on how to weight it. And then we end up with our three categories. So here, now this is a beta, okay? And we're going to have a working paper out real soon with our first public index. So this is a preview. And it shows first, in the first row, the countries by their SSPI ranking. France, Germany, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, all the way down. Look for your own country if you can. Unfortunately, we couldn't put in Hong Kong because they didn't have enough data. We could only put in China. US is way down at 31, but we could put in India's way at the bottom. Let's see, where is China? Does anybody see China? 45. What number? 45. Oh. Oh, it depends, SSPI. So we're first doing SSPI. And then we give it by the 3 categories. So you can look and see how is each country doing separately on sustainability. Some countries are doing much better on sustainability than market structure or on government programs. So you can look across and just see, oh, well, how are they doing in these 3 different areas? So all of these, now let me just tell you, these all represent policies, not performance. So you say, oh, well, what does a policy index tell me? Okay, the policy index tells us how to create a Buddhist economy. Then our next step, once we have this index out and the paper well written so you can figure out how we did it, then we ask, oh, well, what's the relationship between policies and government outcomes or performance? So we'll do an analysis of how the policy index relates. There are a zillion performance indices, lots and lots and lots of them. So that's not a problem. We can just use the performance indices that are out there. There are like no policy indices. So that's why it was somewhat of a difficult challenge to ask, oh, what country looks like a Buddhist economic country? Which ones don't look like that at all, look much more like the free market? So I'm happy to discuss this with you outside of, like privately, because it's sort of boring otherwise to get down into the weeds. But I'm more than happy to talk about it as long as you want to. So we did this. Okay, so I work, by the way, when I say get up and take action, it's not easy. I do a lot of lobbying in California to get clean energy. I live not far from a Chevron refinery. The Chevron people fight mean and dirty. You have to have, first of all, a lot of facts and figures, which they disregard. You've got to have courage. You need a lot of courage to stand up and say, this is what we need right now. We need to stop the air pollution that you're creating. We need to care about what's happening in our community with the Chevron factory. And we need to actually keep fossil fuels in the ground down the road. We're going to have stranded assets. They say, oh, no way, no way. And then they say, oh, but we're going to sustainable energy. Excuse me? No, just as renewable energy? Yeah, 2% of their R&D is in renewable energy. 98% is in discovering new fossil fuels, especially in Texas right now. And that's crazy. Those assets need to stay in the ground, those reserves. There's no way in the world that they can extract those for us to burn without going way above the UN benchmark of 2 degrees. So it's going to take courage, but courage not just to fight big business. It's going to take courage for us to change. It's going to take courage for us to protect the environment. It's going to take courage to promote justice. And it's going to take courage to live with joy. So let me end with telling you that together we can have the political will and the courage to take action now for people and the planet over generations. This is a lifetime commitment and process. May we continue the journey together. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Professor Brown. So the session is open to the floor now. If you have questions, please raise your hand. The gentleman, ladies over there. That side of the hall. The ladies at the front.
I bet you thought I was walking off to go take a hike up to the peak. No, I'm here all day. I wouldn't miss any moment of this conference. It's really been an amazing first day, and I think the second day will equal it in learning and working together.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you. And I think it's very touching what you're talking about. And sometimes I really feel we need courage, and we need more courage, and we need to open our hearts. And it's sometimes so hard to have these discussions also in our country, where we see our government is now lowering environmental standards to protect economy. So it's like a taboo. You cannot touch economy. It's so important. And everything is justified by we have to protect and we have to increase economy because this is important for our standards of life, and it's creating workplaces. So everything is under creating workplaces. And if you want, if you have this discussion, how can we protect environment? How can we lower CO2 emissions? People always say you're hostile to our flourishing, you're hostile, you want to delete our workplaces, and you're always put in the corner. You're cornered with these arguments. And whenever, like this argument, the economy is always like the most important thing. And I'd like to ask you, how can we get beyond this discussion? So how can we answer in a way that we are not like dreamers or like good people who think they are better and not realistic and not down to earth and so on?
Right, no, that's a great question. That's the whole reason I did the SSPI. And while we will not show that, in fact, we already done enough analysis, having a high SSPI, shared sustainable prosperity, actually your country performs better. And I'm from California, where we have the strongest environmental protection laws, and we're getting out of fossil fuel energy than anywhere in the United States and most countries. And our economy is booming, and our jobs, the jobs created by renewable energy have been enormous. So it's like that. What they're saying doesn't have any documentation. So the first thing you say is ask them for documentation. But secondly, you can look and say, look, over the last 30 years, all economic growth in the main important countries has gone disproportionately to rich people, so that people in the middle aren't benefiting from economic growth. Economic growth no longer is the tide that raises all ships. Economic growth now makes rich people richer, which is not helping the well-being of the country. So we have that. And then you say, you know what? You want to structure markets so you get the social output you want. Do you want more jobs? We know how to structure markets to get more jobs with economic growth in renewable energy. And so it's not that we're against economic growth. We're against economic mindless growth with just more and more and more of the same old stuff. Right now, we want economic growth that invests in people's education, health care, child care, elder care, infrastructure for the country to operate better. We have so many needs where we need to actually invest across the economy. What we don't need is a lot more income going to rich people in a wasteful way, and to be honest, even to the rest of us who live quite well and somewhat wastefully. So the answer is, show me the data that says your way works, because I have data that shows you my way can work and does work. So what are your goals? Our goals are to create a meaningful life, support a meaningful life for all people that cares for the human spirit as well as cares for the earth. And a Buddhist economy can do that. A free market economy can live for the last 40 to 50 years to show it can't do that. It's created inequality and enormous problems with CO2 emissions. But thank you, great question.
Hi. Thank you for a really inspiring talk, and I absolutely hope to build on the lady's question. On principle, everything you're saying is making perfect sense. And I'm sure your team back in California have probably discussed this with you whenever you take on the lobbies and the oil industries and all that sort of thing. But everything you're saying is presupposed on the idea that the other side is arguing with you in good faith. So you just brought up data.
I'm sorry, the other side's doing what?
That everything that you're saying is premised on the idea that the other side is arguing with you in good faith, right? So I'm pushing back a little bit in the sense, just for conversation's sake. You talk about data, but I think a lot of people are not interested in data, or they ignore the data that you're presenting, and there are people. For example, I spend a lot of time in Australia and the UK. You know, the governments there have been captured by crazy people, and they're not. Then you know, maybe you've been following the Brexit mess. I don't know, but it is not. We are not dealing with reasonable actors. So I don't know whether you. So I'm sure people have. You've had this discussion with your team many times, and it's probably gets a bit frustrating when non-Americans talk to you about this, because you've probably faced the question before. But
yeah, so let me just say, I've been to Australia and the UK. There are many people there who are fighting for a Buddhist-style economy and against Brexit and against the things that are happening in Australia, which is really suffering from climate change. So let me just say, that's what the whole idea is, why you have to take action. There are plenty of well-minded, well-intentioned people with your same values in your schools, in your communities, in your sanghas, everywhere. And so you get together with them. Now, right now, we are at a low point. I absolutely agree with you. But that doesn't mean that things aren't changing and won't change, because that's why you have to get together with the team, with the group, work together, know your goals, and that's why I want to give you a policy index that says these are the policies that create sustainability, shared prosperity, relieve global suffering. And they are there. These policies are in place. We aren't making them up. We went out and collected the data. And so we can do it. But you made a great point. We have to do it together. We have to spend time doing it. We have to have courage. We have to have data. We have to make good arguments. But mainly, we have to bring people together.
Gentleman in the middle.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Brown. I'm actually, my name is Nathan Chen, and I'm a Christian since 1980, but more and more I think that I believe in Buddhism now. And sorry, my friend, younger friend there, I'd like to respond to him. Around 1992 to 1996, I was in Australia. Not the first time, the second time. I was in Australia to do business for 6 months in 1986. I came back to Hong Kong after I didn't graduate as a doctor in Manchester. So I had wasted my time. But, so I did my second degree at Macquarie University in Australia. So by that time in 1992 already, they were talking about climate changes in Australia. I think Australia is one of the leading countries in terms of addressing the climate change. So it was in 1992. What I learned about Australia is, despite it being a Commonwealth country, most of the migrants who lived in Australia are from Commonwealth countries like Malaysia, Hong Kong, and England. And because Australia being Southern Hemisphere and the land is so big, they have done a lot of work in terms of irrigation. They have done an irrigation called Murrumbidgee irrigation scheme in order to grow orchards and lemon trees in Australia. That's why you get all the oranges.
We need to have time for finishing up questions.
Yeah. What I think is quite important is whenever you drink, there's a saying in Chinese, whenever you drink, think about the origin.
Great. So let me also just say, almost every religion agrees with these ideas of caring for others, caring for the earth. I'm Buddhist, so I used it from a Buddhist viewpoint, but also Buddhism really you know, your satisfaction comes from your inner wealth, not your outer wealth, although outer wealth is fine if used properly, as we learned yesterday. But I actually have an Italian edition of my book, and I was invited to the Vatican, and the Pope loved my book because I really relied a lot upon his Laudato Si about the morality of doing harm to people around the earth every time you drive your car. And so it doesn't have to be Buddhist. Christianity, of course, Christians can read this. Anybody who cares about the human spirit can read this book and say, we can do better, here's how we can do better. So thank you.
Gentlemen on this side.
Hi, Professor Brown. So you did an excellent job in complying with SPI. I think people said you can manage what you can measure. So I think it's a great achievement. I think it's a very good goal, but I think in terms of the challenges Asia are facing is like a lot of corruption. And I think as well as some sort of human trafficking, I think in a lot of part of the world. I'm wondering, so in terms of these metrics, so does it sort of reflect in the SSPI? And also, how can we get from getting over these sort of immediate hurdles to where we try to achieve in terms of the SPI?
Okay. Oh, well, let me tell you, I've actually done a lot of work on measuring economic performance, and I measured a GPI for California, a genuine progress indicator. But chapter 6 of my book is specifically about how to measure economic performance in a way that actually captures well-being and not just market production. So if you're interested in that question, and it goes over all the different ways you can do it, Better Life Index, Gross National Happiness, it goes over all of them and tells you sort of what they do well, what they don't do so well, and tries to bring it together in a way that might make a difference. But I do think how you measure economic performance really matters, as you said. What you measure, you care about and you follow. So I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure I understood it. Maybe afterwards you can ask me, because I can't hear you.
Sorry, in the interest of time, let's take the last question here in the front.
Thank you, Claire, for this amazing and very inspiring presentation you have given. I have 3 small aspects I would like to go deeper in. First of all, in which way were you inspired when you worked out your prosperity policy by the happiness index of Bhutan? That was my first question. Then I see France is on the first place. It is in France, in Paris, that last month there are demonstrations, and it has to do precisely with inequality. In which way is this in contradiction with your research? And then the last question, when you were speaking about political will, the courage of politicians, could you say something more about the aspect in Buddhism that is the most precious to feed, to make greater this political will? Is there an instrument in Buddhism that we forget to make this political will bigger and greater and more efficient, if I may use that term? Okay. Thank you very much.
So let me just say this data is obviously way before the street protest in Paris. And in fact, if any of those street protests verify so France had these great policies that were protecting people and well-being and social safety nets and so forth. And the government came in and said, we're going to really reduce them. And people said, hey, just a second, you think you are, you're not. So if anything, that verifies that people want these policies and are willing to pay for them. And on Bhutan, we don't have data on Bhutan because the country's so small it doesn't have very good data. But the gross national happiness is actually a performance measure. It's not a policy measure. It's actually surveying people and how well they're doing in various ways. So it's a great outcome measure. And so one still wants to get back to the policies. And Bhutan's working on what policies would actually improve these outcome measures, especially when we aren't doing so well. And I wasn't sure about the third question, but I couldn't understand it.
When you are speaking about political will, what is essential to feed this political will? Because we have strong policy in the United States and in other countries. It is not the political courage we are looking for. What can make the difference?
Right, well, that's where you have to organize, and that's also where each country has a different way that they need to have the political will, because our politics and our cultures are different. In the United States, hey, and after we elected Trump, which was a disaster for people on the planet, we took the House back. And that's made a huge difference. In the next election, we have to take the Senate and the presidency back. But we took the House back because we said, just a second. We spent a lot of time electing Congress people, especially Congresswomen, who were much more progressive and would take care of the bad policies that Trump was trying to have. So that was step one, but you can never stop. But it depends upon your own country too. So you could tell me how to do it in your own country. I don't know. I just can talk about the US and California endlessly. But I do know from our experience in the US in 2018, we can do it. Together, we can do it. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot of work, but we can do it. And it was worth it in the United States to take the House back.
I'm lucky enough to get permission from the organizer that we can take the final question. Yeah, at the back.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Actually, I have read your book, but I still excited when I enjoy your presentation. Before I raise my question, I have to tell you that I'm a Buddhist, I'm an economist, and I totally agree with all of this. But one of the things that struck me is that I like you to give an advice. You know, if you were to give an advice to the people who are attending here. Actually, I'm flying all the way from Cambodia just for this conference. Nothing else. This idea, I mean, the Buddha teaching, it was more than 2,500 years ago. But the Buddhist community is becoming smaller. The Buddhist economic, it has been probably 50 years since Schumer. And today, I think we are really feel that is, you know, those two together, we can do something for the world and for all of us, and we all agree. So I was just wondering, how would you advise? I need some advice about all of us that enjoy this, seem to become minority, you know, in the society, because we frustrated, we have the idea, now you move the idea to the policy, but, you know, there's another step. You know, it was just an idea, policy, but into the implementation, and we always struggle when we are moving from idea to policy, and then from policy to the implementation. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So first of all, let me tell you, we don't call this a Buddhist Economic Policy Index. We call it Sustainable Shared Prosperity Policy Index, so that you don't even have to mention the word Buddhist. You do have to ask this question to people. Whenever I'm out working with people and trying to mobilize people in California, and they'll say, oh, I love the way I live, and I say, what makes your life meaningful? And all of a sudden, they tell you about relationships and experiences and their community life and their creative hobby, whatever it is. But they never talk about buying stuff, or they never talk about anything other than the things that we all as human beings care about. Are, you know, creating sort of our full potential, caring for others, giving back to the community, and so forth. And the minute you start talking to them that way, they say, oh, you're right. I say, well, then now we've got a serious problem. A lot of people, they'll say, I care about my children or my grandchildren. I say, we have a serious problem, that your children or grandchildren are not going to have a world that's inhabitable in a way that we really could appreciate it and know it. You have a serious problem. And when you talk about it that way, you really engage them. And they say, oh, so I don't really have to worry about giving up sort of a standard of living. I said, no, actually, your standard of living is going to get a lot better. You're going to have clean air, clean water, less extreme temperature. You're actually going to be having a healthier, happier life. So you've got to talk about it in that way, I think. And then that's why I really hope this policy index helps pushing along the discussion. But all I say is thank you for being out there working on it, because that's the main thing. Together, which we all are working on it as economists or psychologists or political scientists or computer scientists, we all have something to contribute to our Sangha or our group or our community working on it together. And I do know that together we can create the world that we not only want, but the world that we need. So let me end with the Buddhist prayer. A very short one, but one of my favorites. May we heal the earth as we heal ourselves for the benefit of all. Thank you so much.
I think we all treasure our time with Professor Brown, and I wonder if you would like to take a shorter break, and maybe we have like 1 to 2 more questions. Let me know, like if you really wish to take a shorter break, or Professor, do you mind? So, should we maybe take one more question?
I wanted to quickly address the gentleman who just raised the question. I'm sorry, I'm excited about this. It's fate. I was asked to join a WeChat group this morning on the way here that has 452 members. Guess what slides I just sent them? Guess what I just took pictures of and sent to a group of people in mainland China with 452 members, and who knows how many other people they're connected to. So that's one other way you can get the word out. You know, it's one at a time. We change people one at a time. I don't know who knows who, but you know what? That's 452 people of that number. If even 10% of them pay attention to it, and if even 10% of them send out this message to 1 or 2 other people, look at how many people we touch with just, you know, this is one of the true benefits of this very irritating technology.
Thank you for your feedbacks. Thank you. Thank you all. And I know that you may have more questions for Professor Brown, and please take your chance to come to her. And during break, we still have plenty of chance. So please be back. We'll have a break about like 10 minutes, and please be back at around like 10:15. Thank you.